Hello, welcome to Games That Don't Suck, a gaming retrospective in the Shea Hates Everything podcast family. My name's Kyle. I am your host today. Of course, joined by my brother Shea. Welcome, Shea.
Hi, hello. Lots of games to talk about today.
Terrific to have you on my game show.
Yeah, sure. Always nice to join.
Not like a Price is Right game show, but a podcast show about games. My game show.
Fair. I should get one of those sub cards where once you get you buy 9 subs, you get the 10th for free. I need a punch card for appearances on this podcast.
Yeah.
Where after however many I get a special little treat.
Yeah, when you've done 100 of these podcasts, you get to do 101th.
I see.
Uh-huh.
Okay. Allow me to resign from doing this podcast. That would be 50 years. Although the plan, we started in 1995.
Yeah, 50 years of games, yeah.
Yeah, we're already signing up for 30 years, even just to catch up to modern day. So that's a lot in and of itself. It's only 20. By the time we catch up, it will have been another 20 years. So really, there you go. There's 50 years.
Get your punch card ready. Games That Don't Suck is a series where we focus on a particular year in gaming and we arrive at a scientifically calculated top 5 games of each year. Mm-hmm. This month we're talking about the games of the year 2000. Get ready for that joke 20 times today. Shea and I have trolled through, skimmed, brushed through. What's a
trolled
good...
is a good.
Trolled is good.
Both in terms of our mental state, our physical state, spiritual state. We're definitely in troll mode for sure.
Yes, we've engaged in troll mode to go through the entire Wikipedia list of games from the year 2000, including games from 99, because the Wikipedia does the first release of a game, assigns it a year. There are a lot of games that came out the year prior in Japan. So as we go through, when we were going through the 1999 games, we saw several games that we wanted to talk about in 99, but actually came out in North America in 2000. So we've carried those over in addition to going through the year 2000 games. What we've assembled here is a long list of games in alphabetical order that we will talk about in turn. Each of us has games assigned to us. And once we've talked about the long list, we'll be moving games up to what we call a short list. And then we pare the games down further to the top 5.
The short list is usually barely shorter than the long list.
Yes. It's kind of our running gag. Unintentionally.
Yeah, we might cut 10% of the games.
Yeah. It is technically the shorter list.
It is short. It is definitely shorter. Absolutely.
Yes. We should just call it the shorter list.
Right. The shorter list.
Yeah. And from there we go down to a top 5. And from there we order the top 5. So that is a big part of what we do here. Like I said, it's scientific. It is unimpeachable. You cannot argue with our results. But Absolutely. There are also a lot of games that released in 2000 that Shea and I have not played that we know are cult classics or part of the cultural zeitgeist of the day. And so we just want to kind of list those off as a little bit of a taste test for folks at home as we're jumping into the list to kind of cement you in the time and place of the games that we'll be talking about. So some other notable games from 2000, some honorable mentions: Baldur's Gate 2, the first Counter-Strike game, which is huge. Again, haven't played it. The first Deus Ex game, Dino Crisis 2, I hope to play very soon. Echo the Dolphin, Defender of the Future, huge
Great
release.
Name. Love that. The final Echo the Dolphin game.
Ah, yes,
on the Dreamcast.
Course. The one that killed the franchise.
Well, no.
I know, I'm kidding.
No. Highly lauded.
I'm kidding.
Just never played it.
Escape from Monkey Island, Legend of Dragoon, Legend of Mana, Mega Man Legends 2, a lot of Legends going on, and then the Mega Man Legends spin-off, Misadventures of Tron Bonne, Paper Mario on the N64, Resident Evil Code Veronica, Resident Evil Survivor, The Sims, and Siphon Filter 2. So just to kind of if you're old like we are and you were alive when this stuff released, kind of bring your mind back in time to the golden age of video games, the less golden age for a lot of other things, but golden age of video games. Damn it.
Well, and also like that way when we're talking about these other games, if you're like, hey, wait, they didn't talk about Counter-Strike or Mega Man Legends 2, it's just because we haven't played it.
Yeah.
So that's why we want to acknowledge that there's always a list of games that everybody loves. We just happen to not have played. But don't worry, our actual long list is plenty long. We have 18 games to talk about, which I think it might be our longest long list that we have done.
We'll say that every episode. It's up for the readers to fact check us. The readers, the listeners to fact check us.
But point being, we're going from 18 down to 5. It's going to be a bloodbath.
Yeah. I will self-correct. If they're listeners and they want to fact check, the fastest way to do that is to become a reader of the show notes. So, really, I was right. I was right.
True. SheaHatesEverything.com.
All right. The long list, as I mentioned before, alphabetically, starting with Army Men, Sarge's Heroes 2 on the PlayStation 2. This was developed by the 3DO company and published by them. It has the lowest game rankings of games on this list.
By a significant order of magnitude.
Significant order of magnitude.
Are you sure this wasn't meant for the Games That Suck podcast?
I'm sure, because you played this too, and I know you like this game too.
Yes.
This is a game rankings aggregate score of 55.99, almost a 56, I will say, and it's to its credit, almost a 56.
Almost there.
This is my favorite Army Men game. I've played most of them. A special place in my heart for some of those early PS1 ones.
There is no way you have played. No, I'm just saying there's no way you've played most of the Army Men games.
I have.
Army Men Sarge's Heroes 2 is one of like 9 Army Men games that released in this year.
Yeah, dude.
There have been so many Army Men games.
Or Air Attack 2. There are like variations, like different versions that released on like the Game Boy or the Game Boy Advanced over time and stuff like that too. But yeah, dude, like Sarge's Heroes 2 is the best of them. Okay, because growing up, we had actual little Army Men figures that we would like set up battles and stuff with and play with all the time. And so like having them come to life in a sort of like Saturday morning cartoon format was really, really exciting and like just kind of sparked the imagination. And I was like totally the target demo for something like this. It was great.
It was like the Army Men in Toy Story.
Yes, totally.
Like they had personalities and agency, and I mean, the games had a much more tongue-in-cheek, like fascistic viewpoint on war of toys. But yeah,
right. Sarge's Heroes 2 is especially cool versus the other Army Men games because you're playing as different characters. You get to play as the Colonel's daughter, and like kick ass as her, the chick with the blue hair. Get to play as her for a little while. It's jumping back and forth between like real world levels where you're tiny toy size and levels that are like appropriately sized for, it's like another, I don't know if it's like another dimension or what it is, but it's like world that is appropriately sized for your toys. Like you're going through portals to the different levels and stuff. So I really like the mix of levels, the way that it plays with the size, kind of back and forth. So you get the nostalgic hits of the fridge level, like jumping around in between the different shelves on the fridge, fighting enemies and stuff, and also like what felt like more like a third-person Call of Duty-ish standard war mission. But again, with like the trappings of the writing and stuff and the tongue-in-cheek nature of it that you mentioned before. So I just thought that was really fun. It made it feel like an evolution of the franchise, and still keeping with the kind of iconic Honey, I Shrunk the Kids feeling of running around in a tiny size of these really large spaces. So Army Men Sarge's Heroes is awesome. I put this on here because again I was going through the list alphabetically, and as I began to add other games to it, I was like, yo, Army Men Sarge's Hero 2 is not sticking around. We got to put those toys back in the bin. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to nominate Sarge's Heroes 2 for the short list. We're going to leave it behind in the toy bin where it belongs and just let my fond memories be fond memories. I will take no corrections on Army Men Sarge's Heroes 2 in the emails. Thank you.
I have a lot of fond memories of like all of the Army Men games because I also played a bunch of them. Many of them were not good video games.
No.
It is hard for me to the daughter with the blue hair I definitely remember, but a lot of the actual gameplay and missions, like I remember the fridge level, but it's hard to parse between all the different Army Men games for me, so it would be hard for me to have specific passion for Sarge's Heroes 2, but I definitely have a lot of nostalgia for the Army Men series, and we haven't talked a lot about those games on these podcasts, so it's a good shout out for sure.
Yeah.
Next on the list is Banjo-Tooie for the N64, developed by Rare, published by Nintendo. This one has a game rankings of 91.31.
It's a good score.
This is the first example in what will be many examples from this year of sequels that are awesome, but that I liked less than the original.
Totally.
That's like half of the games on this list this year.
Yeah.
Which makes it kind of a hard year to look at objectively, but there are so many great games. It's just like once we get through the list, I think our listeners will recognize the point that I'm making. But Banjo-Tooie specifically, I think the biggest thing about Banjo-Tooie was it was a bigger and better kind of approach to the game. It had much larger worlds to explore, more interconnected worlds to explore, similar to kind of what we saw like in the Spyro series. They kind of like Donkey Kong 64'd Banjo-Kazooie into making Banjo-Tooie.
Right.
I think the downside of that, a lot of my memory is kind of wandering aimlessly around the world because there was more focus on like puzzle solving out in the big world. And so there were many times where I felt sort of a loss of momentum or like a loss of what I'm supposed to do next, where I'm supposed to go next.
Yeah, not great guidance on what to do next.
Yeah, but the characters are still lovable. It's still a really great, vibrant, universe and the different worlds that you're exploring. The platforming is still fantastic, product of its time. Nowadays, it's, doesn't hold up as well. But I had a fantastic time with Banjo-Tooie. I definitely liked it less than the first game, mostly just because it was just a bigger and better. And while sometimes that does make it feel actually better, many times the approach of we just want more of that, it's just like the impact of that is a little bit less.
Totally.
And that's kind of what Banjo-Tooie was for me.
Right.
Many of the other sequels on this list I like less because they're too much of a departure from the original. So it's interesting that like Tooie is really close to the original, but I still liked it less. And I think it's just, being a kid, your first exposure to something, like that's where the excitement is. And so it's just less exciting to come back to it, although I do really like it.
Sequels are tricky. Like you got to kind of thread the needle, right? Like you don't want to depart too far, but you don't want it to be the same. So you have to kind of provide what you provided already, but layer a few things on top of it that are at least interesting. And I feel like as long as you can do that, you've kind of justified the sequel. Otherwise, you risk alienating people.
Yes, and this is a completely justified sequel. Like I said, I do love the game. It's very fun. It's just comparing a game that was one of my favorite games when it came out to this. That just makes the difference feel much bigger. And I know you're not as hot and bothered over the Banjo-Kazooie series in general.
No, not as much.
So I don't think that this one continues on, mostly because I know you don't have a passion for it. It might be I don't know. It might be a top 5 game just for me, but it's borderline. And so adding you into the mix, I feel like it's not one that I would fight for compared to some of the other ones we're going to get to.
Right. I think that's fair.
Next is Chrono Cross. See, you're already starting to see the point I'm making here. A sequel to an amazing game that is, in this case, very different in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
So this was on PlayStation 1, developed by Square, published by Square and EA in North America. Game rankings of 92.28. So this one, I think like maybe the easiest way to talk about it is the similarities and the differences. So similarities wise, it's the same world as Chrono Trigger. Same kind of structure to how you're navigating the overworld, same kind of structure to how you're initiating battles, so it's got no random encounters, etc., which was a differentiator for Chrono Trigger at the time, but it feels right for a sequel to kind of do that thing too. It still has a ton of party members. I think there are 45 people that you can recruit throughout the story. Many. It's insane. It's absolutely insane. And it's a similarity and a difference to say that the story is very out there. So whereas Chrono Trigger was a time travel story, which is not always my favorite, but it worked because the characters were so lovable, Chrono Cross is more of a like parallel universe, parallel world story, which is also not typically my favorite. And while I did enjoy it, I just enjoyed the story less than I did Chrono Trigger's.
Okay.
And that in an RPG, especially of this era, the story is like a huge component of what I'm looking for from an RPG, because from a gameplay perspective, most RPGs in this era were doing very similar things.
Okay.
Like, so you could say,
do you remember, I don't know if you do or not specifically, but because I have not played Chrono Cross, do you remember if the parallel worlds, were they just like slightly different? Was it like going for that kind of parallel world where it's like kind of spot the difference, but those differences have like larger meaning underneath? Or is it like two very different parallel universes?
I think they're pretty different.
Okay.
It's not like a butterfly effect type thing.
Right.
Like it's more of like Doctor Strange in the multiverse, like they're pretty different.
Okay.
I believe that's what my memory. There might be some exceptions to that, but I think they're pretty different.
All right. I mean, that's cool.
It is. It's creative and it's cool. It's just like I get to visit all these places. That is what is cool. Very, very much like that's what was cool about Chrono Trigger, was being in all these time periods in history. But crafting like a compelling story that weaves all of those things together in a like complex but easy to understand way, especially for a kid, gets a little tougher. And I don't know, maybe it's because a lot of games and stuff had those sorts of stories at this age. Maybe that's where I like developed more of a distaste, because I just didn't like that stuff as much. But yeah, so that, I mean, story wise, it's similar in its approach, but obviously very different in the story. I think very few, if any, characters carry through between the two, which I know was a big sticking point for people. And honestly, I feel like Chrono Cross in a lot of ways was disserved by being a sequel, quote unquote, and marketed as a sequel to Chrono Trigger, because it's more of a sequel in that like Final Fantasy IX is a sequel to Final Fantasy VIII.
Yeah, like
there's a lot of similarities in the style of game and in the themes of the game, but a lot of the gameplay, the characters, the story are completely new and different. So that, I think it's tough. Like, I feel like people have been kinder to Chrono Cross as the years have gone by. Like, I don't think you would ask anyone that's played it and they're like, yeah, this game sucks ass. Like, everybody agrees that it's an amazing RPG. But compared to Chrono Trigger, there was disappointment when it came out because of how different it felt. And I feel like that, at least for me, like that disappointment has softened over time. When I like look back, as we're prepping for this podcast, when I look back at it, it's just a really, really well crafted turn-based RPG with, you know, great characters, great story. I just like it less than Chrono Trigger. And, you know, it's not necessarily like, look, Chrono Trigger won our game of the year, the year that it came out.
Right.
I'm not saying that Chrono Cross sucks. I personally, like, I would say we should go ahead and keep it. It's just it's hard to talk about it in relation to Chrono Trigger because of how fucking good Chrono Trigger is.
Right, and it's
kind of like talking about Final Fantasy VII and Final Fantasy VIII, maybe.
I will like maybe because again I have not played Chrono Cross, but I do think time travel is inherently more interesting to me than parallel universes, because with time travel, it's the same like you can become attached to the world and see the impact of things through time, whereas parallel universes, they are two different worlds, and so you're not becoming, I feel like the world is not a character anymore, because there are two of them. It becomes harder. I mean, this is personally, and just thinking about this like philosophically, but like I feel like I have a harder time being as invested in the world of two parallel worlds versus the world of time travel, where you're seeing the same place evolve and change over time.
Yeah. There's a more consequence when it's like a time travel thing versus a parallel world thing. Although I will say, like, maybe in opposition to that, that is part of the story in Chrono Cross, is that like the parallel universes, because they're connected through, like, the story makes them connected.
Sure.
Changing things in one universe changes it in the other universe.
I see. Okay.
And so that it does have an actual impact. And, you know, the universes are different, but I think a lot of characters exist in both. They're just different. Like, you'll have the same character in one as in another. They're just different people, which again goes to that, like, Multiverse of Madness style, where Doctor Strange exists in all of these, but he's very different in all of them. Right. That's kind of the approach that they took too.
Yeah. Okay.
Using Multiverse of Madness is a weird analogy. That's just the most recent parallel universe piece of art I have consumed. Yeah. So that's where my mind goes.
No, I think that's fair.
They are not similar.
Yeah. That sounds really cool. I don't want to, like, I'm not saying that to, like, go, oh, we shouldn't keep it, but.
No, but I agree with you. I think that time travel stuff, I think it's the consequence, at least for me, the consequence makes it feel more compelling.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, I think we should keep it for now.
Okay. Then we will. All right, next up is Diablo II on PC, the personal computer. This was developed by Blizzard North, published by Blizzard Entertainment, has a game rankings of 88.58. I'm actually surprised this one's not over a 90. This is the best Diablo game. In the same vein as Army Men, Sarge's Heroes 2 is the best Army Men game. Diablo 2 is the best. They're
basically the same game. Yeah.
It has a fantastic sense of discovery, the feeling of accomplishment when you beat dungeons and get to move on to the next location through the portals, like learning how those work, you know, the story slowly unfolding before you, you know, talking to oh god, what was his name? I can't remember the old guy's name in Diablo 2. But it was really interesting to learn, like, because this was my first Diablo game. I went back and tried to play the first one like a while afterwards and was like, this is not as good. And then obviously I did not like Diablo 3 or 4 quite as much because of other various like difficulty ramp up mechanics, etc. I think like Diablo 2 is like a total sweet spot for me, like learning and like you're learning how the gem socketing works, how the like the incremental gear stuff, where it was kind of my first for a lot of those types of things. So I think that probably colors my perception, because it's, you know, you never forget your first Diablo game. I have a lot of attachment to 2, and it's kind of the only Diablo game that I have a lot of attachment to. But I also feel like I have criticisms of the other entries that I don't of Diablo 2, if that makes sense.
It does, yes.
I think it's a terrific, really, really good video game. I know they remastered it semi-recently.
I own it, yeah.
I definitely intend to play that at some point, but I'm playing all sorts of other games. So I just haven't gotten around to it yet. So I'm having to rely on, you know, a long time ago memory. I did get, so this is actually kind of fun. I got Diablo 2. My friend in junior high burned me a copy of Diablo 2. And then that's how I was able to play it, which is kind of fun.
Nice.
is that stealing? I guess it is, right? But I was a kid. I didn't know any different. Yeah, I'm trying to think if I want to keep Diablo 2, and I think I do, because it is like it's kind of important to me. I think of it very fondly. It's one of those games that I don't think about very often, but when I am reminded of it, I'm like, oh yeah, Diablo 2, man, that's the shit. I don't know, like I have a few of those games just kind of like sitting at the back of my brain where a thing will spark a synapse and I'm like, oh right, that exists, that game fucking rules. And Diablo 2 is definitely that for me, and like in spite of how I feel about 3 and 4, I still have those have not ruined my feelings for 2 in any way. So that's sticking around, and up next is Final Fantasy 9 for the PlayStation 1. Speaking of Final Fantasies, developed by Square, published by Square Electronic Arts, game rankings of 92.72. I think Final Fantasy 9 is a great looking game. I think the pre-rendered backgrounds look terrific. They're very like fantastical. I think like the return to that style was very refreshing after 7 and 8. I don't think, especially now having played 8 very recently, they don't utilize motion in the pre-rendered backgrounds as effectively as 8 did. Okay. I still think it's very good, but they're not doing as many like interesting, like all the perspective shifting. They would do like the pre-rendered backgrounds in 8 would like transition into video files of the pre-rendered backgrounds, then fully animating, and the camera wouldn't actually swing around. It was the character models that were swinging to make it feel like the camera was shifting in time with the background. But 8 was doing a lot of that kind of stuff, and not as much of that happens in 9, if I'm recalling. I never beat 9. I think it's like over halfway, but I did never end up beating it. So I guess there is that caveat as well. But
do you think that's a symptom of like the more standard fantasy setting of 9?
No, I think it's that I came to it late.
No. The like the visual style not being as interesting, and like what you're talking about with like the backgrounds and the environments and stuff. Like, do you think that because 8 and even 8 was very much informed by 7,
right?
That it's got more of that like techno vibe to it.
Yes, it is more futuristic.
And 9, I haven't played 9, but 9 I thought was more like pretty standard fantasy.
Yes and no. Like there's still like
stuff.
Airship kind of stuff going on, and lights and all that too. It's not like medieval or fantasy or anything.
Right.
It still holds to that like fantasy technology, but definitely not as advanced as 7 and 8.
Right.
So maybe that was part of it, right? Is that it didn't fit as much, but I feel like they could have done more with the cinematic shots, like the movement on the pre-rendered backgrounds and stuff. I feel like there was opportunity for more of that. I feel like they didn't fully capitalize on it. It is a massive game, but so is 8. But yeah, I don't know. I don't want to like levy that as a like wholesale criticism of the game. It's just like I wish they had done a little bit more of that. Just because, especially recently, I marked that as one of my favorite parts of 8. Just like the cinematography and the way in which they were messing with that technology was really cool.
Right.
Also for Final Fantasy 9, I don't remember a damn thing about the cast members. Your main dude has a tail, and there's a white thing that you get in a swamp. I really don't remember a whole lot about the cast of 9.
Compelling.
I've tried playing it 3 times and haven't gotten through to beat it any of those 3 times. So I don't have the same. For the reasons I have stated, I do not have a significant attachment to 9. What was your experience with 9?
I have not played. So yeah, we've talked on a number of the pods that it's one of the few Final Fantasy games that I've just like never touched.
Yeah.
It's I'm sure one of my buddies from high school, like it was his favorite Final Fantasy game, so I've seen bits and pieces, but I've never played through myself. So I know it is like, I feel like for years, Final Fantasy 12 has been like the underrated Final Fantasy, but I feel like people have come around to it since the Zodiac Age.
Yeah.
And now I feel like the consensus is like Final Fantasy 9 is the one that no one talks about.
Right.
That they should. So I feel like people love that game, but it's not held in the same standard as a lot of the ones that we talk about. 4, 6, 7, 10.
Right. Yeah, so I'm kind of fine leaving it. I'm sure there were some people listening that are like, oh, you really need to stick it through and see 9 through because there's this moment that's great or that moment that's great. I'm sure I will someday, especially now that I own a really nice looking copy of it on the original PlayStation. I should absolutely play that. I have a game guide for it as well. Maybe this strategy guide will actually tell me how to beat the last boss. But yeah, I don't feel compelled at this moment to keep it around.
Yeah, I bought it digitally. I don't know what storefront. I guess like the PlayStation 4 had a version of it, maybe. Because as I was scrolling through my games, like looking for stuff to play, I saw that I had Final Fantasy 9.
Oh, okay.
I was like, oh, I should play this at some point. So, which I'm sure was my mentality when I bought it years ago and forgot.
Totally.
Okay, next on the list is Hitman Codename 47. So this is the original Hitman game. It was released only on PC, developed by IO Interactive and published by Eidos Interactive. This is a game rankings of 73.65, which I feel like is probably fair.
Yeah.
I have really fond memories of the first Hitman game, but I would put it in a similar category as like the first Assassin's Creed game or the first Splinter Cell game, in that it is wildly innovative. It has so many cool ideas, but it's also pretty janky and like it's very obviously a first attempt at a really ambitious idea.
Right.
So I think it's worth talking about here. I definitely don't think it's one of our 5 best games, but I think like for people that haven't played it because they started with the sequel, because that's when they started coming to console, like this game, I mean, just think of a very stripped down version of what you think of as Hitman. Even the early Hitman games, when they started adding some of the kookiness, that wasn't really in the first one. It was a lot of like sneaking around, not like blending in, but actually sneaking and stealthing around, assassinating people, stealing their clothes in order to break into the next area, repeat. You had very standard spy type weapons, so it wasn't a lot of the like, how do I figure out how to drop this vase off of a building in order to hit this guy and knock him into a baseball bat? Like, it wasn't crazy stuff like that. It was, you had a sniper rifle, you had a silenced pistol, I think you had like the piano wire that you could use, and a lot of that type of thing. It was very fun, but it wasn't... Where Hitman has gone has been awesome. And I haven't played the last couple Hitman games, but I've loved many Hitman games. The first one doesn't have a lot of that, like, je ne sais quoi.
Right.
But you can see where it's headed. And that, like, I just think it's really cool. I think it's worth talking about because of that.
Yeah, for sure. That's that's exactly my feelings on the game as well. I feel like they didn't really... because, like, Contracts is also really good, but it's kind of... It has the same problems, not problems, but the same kind of lack of something extra sprinkled on top. So I think Blood Money is kind of the first one that really hits
that's
that,
the one
where they kind of find their stride. So yeah, I'm also cool with leaving Codename 47 behind.
We're not moving that many games up. We might have to revisit some of these.
Yeah.
Although I'll say the next game is going to stick around. So the next game is Jet Set Radio, technically Jet Grind Radio when it released in North America, but everybody calls it Jet Set Radio. This originally released on the Dreamcast, developed by Smilebit and published by Sega. Game rankings of a 91 flat. This game rules. It in this era was like one of my first experiences of hearing a soundtrack and being like, this is the shit. I want to listen to this all the time. This is what, like, I want the CD, I want to put in my headphones and listen to the soundtrack for Jet Set Radio. It has style to spades. The visual style is so cool and unique. It's very comic booky and also like a little bit of a mix of the 90s cartoon era with some cell shading on top of it. It had that like great high score kind of chasing idea around it, added with a ton of variety in the things that you're doing on each of the maps, with like tagging the different graffitis, etc. And it all, like, the time limit stuff was always not always my favorite mechanic. Is actually like was always my least favorite thing about Tony Hawk Pro Skater also, but like I think added a lot to the sense of momentum and sense of like I gotta maximize all my tricks,
right,
because I only have a certain amount of time. But yeah, I think that this game like cemented vibes in a video game in a way that few games had ever done prior to it releasing.
Yeah, I've never played Jet Set Radio. I've seen quite a bit of it be played. Obviously, like, we didn't have Dreamcast.
It's been re-released on like everything, which is where I think I played it on PS2. I don't know where it really, maybe PS3 is probably where I played it. But yeah, it's been re-released on every system known to man.
Yeah,
because no one bought a Dreamcast.
Exactly.
And the game was too good to let it just sit there.
Exactly. It's just one of the ones that I kept missing. You know, like, it's never pulled the trigger on it to play it, but I know enough about it to agree with how awesome it is.
Yeah, I definitely think this one should stay for sure.
Yeah.
Okay, next on the list, Legend of Zelda: Majora's Mask. See previous comments on Chrono Cross. I think there's a lot of similarities in the sequel nature of Majora's Mask. And honestly, it's a lot of similar reaction to how people felt about it compared to Chrono Cross. And people have come around to it over time, and as looking at it as more of a standalone game and less as a sequel to one of the greatest games ever made.
Yeah,
it's in a much better light these days. I do think, for me, as like not the biggest Zelda fan in the world, I loved Ocarina of Time. I loved Link's Awakening, which I never played the original, but I loved the re-release. And I like generally haven't loved a ton of other Zelda games. Majora's Mask is kind of in between for me, because like I played it because of how much I loved Ocarina of Time. And I was very confused by it because it was so different.
Yeah.
And I really appreciate the risks that they took on Majora's Mask. But I do think that the like time mechanic was not my favorite in implementation. Oh yes, thank you, Kyle. Kyle's highlighting. I'm breaking the fourth wall because I screwed up. Kyle was highlighting in the doc our like publisher game rankings crap because I skipped it. I'm sorry. Okay, edit this part out. Majora's Mask was developed by Nintendo and published by Nintendo. Game rankings of 91.95, which is very high, but not the highest. So yeah, I think that's the most piece I have to say about Majora's Mask. Compared to a game like Chrono Cross, I have less love for Majora's Mask because I found it to be more different than its predecessor in ways that I didn't like as much. But I do think it's a very worthy game in the greater pantheon of Zelda, and I like that people have come around on it because it's a Zelda game that I like more than most Zelda games, which I know is not a common sentiment, but it's nice that other people are like, yeah, this game doesn't suck anymore. Because I'm like, yeah, I liked it at the time.
Yeah, I think also never played Majora's Mask because I had seen it be played, and once you understand what you need to do, I always felt that the act of actually doing the thing that you need to do in Majora's Mask was annoying. And like time consuming and annoying. It like once you've solved, it felt like I had solved a puzzle through cultural osmosis. And so like the act of just performing the thing to put the solution into effect was more annoying than it was worth doing.
Yeah, I can see that. Yeah, there was a sentiment around Majora's Mask, I think, is because it had the kind of like moody tone to it that it made it feel a little more tedious compared to Ocarina of Time. Because Ocarina of Time it's this grand adventure. It's this huge open space that you've never really seen before in a Zelda game. And then Majora's Mask is like a lot of that same stuff, just like Tim Burton-esque,
right,
in a way. And so there's a little bit of tedium that kind of comes along with that.
And I think the soundtrack kind of reinforces that too, right? Like the soundtrack of Majora's Mask is much darker, more subdued versus Ocarina, where it's much more upbeat. I think that's also part of kind of setting that tone as well.
Yeah. And again, like in idea, I think that's awesome. I think it's so cool to follow up a game like Ocarina of Time with like the moody younger brother version of that game. It's just like the execution, like some of the core systems in the game I just didn't love.
Right.
And that's kind of where I come down on it.
Yeah.
It is tough though, because I wouldn't keep it. I was about to like backtrack and make an argument for keeping it around, but I don't think so.
Yeah.
Because it is very, very good. And it's much like Chrono Cross, which ironically I argued to keep. It's just it stands in the shadow of one of the best games ever made, and that's very hard to compare yourself against.
Yeah.
The irony is that Majora's Mask does more to differentiate itself from the Big Brother game than Chrono Cross does, but I think it's less successful in those efforts than Chrono Cross is in its efforts.
Sure.
So yeah, I think we cut it, but I would put that one on the borderline because we've only got 3 games so far.
Well,
so Majora's Mask might come back.
We got plenty of games left, don't worry.
There are a lot we still have to talk about. Okay, next on the list, Mario Tennis for the N64. Developed by Camelot Software Planning and published by Nintendo. It is a game rankings of 87.32. I do not think this is one of the top 5 games. I do love this game and want to shout it out because I was a huge fan of the Mario blank sports games. Yeah. Mario Strikers and Tennis and Mario Golf, etc. And Mario Tennis, like I played Mario Golf on the Game Boy, but Mario Tennis was like, it's on a home console. Like it's a much bigger, better experience. And I thought the game had a great sort of approach similar to like what they were doing in the Mario Kart series with like the side modes that helped keep things super fresh and super fun.
Yeah,
there was important. like a ring mode where you have to aim the tennis balls through the rings. There's a piranha challenge mode with like the other side is just piranha plants and they're shooting tennis balls at you that you have to hit back. And I thought all of those were really fun at the time, but the core systems around actual like tennis playing, while it lacks any of the complexity of like a current day Mario Tennis game, it still felt really tactile because the different buttons gave you different spin on the ball. And so aiming the racket plus A or B button could make completely different serves or whatever, counter serves or whatever it's called when you hit the ball back, returns or whatever. And so that felt very cool. It felt like there was a lot of strategy that you could implement despite such a simple control scheme. And that's like some of the brilliance of Nintendo back in the day was how they they were able to make such customizable, complex systems very simple for the player to engage with.
Right.
I feel like they've very much lost their way when it comes to that stuff, especially for like UI and navigation and things. But back in the day, Mario Tennis is a perfect example of it's just like 2 buttons, but there's a million different things you can do with just those 2 buttons, and that's really cool.
Yeah, I think Nintendo's at their best when they're working under constraints, and they have very few constraints nowadays.
Yeah, true. So yeah, Mario Tennis, a very good one. Perhaps my favorite Mario sports game, if we're throwing out the kart games.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think
Strikers is very good.
Strikers is probably my favorite, I think.
Yeah, that one's very good also.
But you're good leaving that one behind?
Yeah, I think we can leave it behind.
Okay. Next up is Medal of Honor Underground for the PlayStation 1. another sequel. Developed by DreamWorks Interactive, published by EA, game rankings of 85.65. So I think I actually, in researching this game and remembering it, I think I actually prefer Underground to the original, because in the original game, you're very much like a lone wolf the entire time, kind of like lone operative. In this one, you have some missions that are still like that, but you are playing alongside some allies in this one. You feel like you're a little bit part of a squad for a few missions. There are like some vehicle-based missions where you're trying to blow up tanks and stuff. More variety of weapons. The different kinds of objectives that you're doing, I think, are a little more sophisticated, a little more interesting than the first one. And I mean, the biggest difference for me was in the environments and the level of detail in Underground versus the original. There are more props scattered throughout the environments. I think the lighting's a little bit better, and the locations that you go to are far more varied than in the first game. It feels like a lot more globe-trotting than the original Medal of Honor game. So Underground is really, really good. I think, did that first Medal of Honor make our list, whatever year that was?
That is a good question. I think it would have been 99, right?
Oh, maybe. Because I would like to keep Underground around, because I really like it.
The first Medal of Honor did make the top 5.
Okay. Medal of Honor Underground, I do think it is better in pretty much every respect than the first one.
Interesting. I don't have as strong memories of this one.
Okay.
I remember the first game and Frontline, which I think was the third one.
Okay. One of the
those are the two.
One of the other cool things about Underground was when you beat the game, there was like a special mode. I don't remember what it was called, but it was like it was almost like a, I know zombies is a Call of Duty thing, but it was almost like a version of that where it was like weird shit, like dogs, like you'd be fighting dogs that had guns, and like,
do you mean when you beat the game?
Yeah, when you beat the game, you unlock like a mode. Is there anything about it on
that? Sounds familiar.
Wikipedia?
I know Call of Duty did also do that, though. Call of Duty had a mode in like their museum mode after you beat it that had like some zombies and stuff, like where you're in. Okay. So you might be conflated, because I don't remember that Medal of Honor, but that's
Panzer
totally possible.
Knacker Unleashed, a non-canon bonus level. Strange enemies are fought at a castle, including gun-toting and vehicle-driving dogs, knights carrying battle axes, zombie soldiers, robotic soldiers, and several large nutcrackers. It's really, really weird, but very fun. And like, it's like a great reward for having played through the campaign. Because like there are more weapons and more things that you can engage with in this one versus the first one. And so like an excuse to really play in that sandbox of toys, not sandbox, play in that toy box was a lot of fun and really rewarding. So Medal of Honor Underground is really, really good. All right, that's one sticking around. So moving on.
I like it.
Perfect Dark for the N64. Developed by Rare and published by them. Game rankings of 94.55. I like Perfect Dark more than GoldenEye. I said it.
Okay.
There. The gauntlet has been thrown.
I think there are plenty of people that would agree with that.
I want to meet those people and be friends with them. I liked it more than GoldenEye, because I played GoldenEye very recently. Granted, I have not played Perfect Dark very recently, but my memories of Perfect Dark are it's a lot more stealth focused. Whereas I felt like a lot of my time in GoldenEye was kind of run and gun. I think you can do some stealth related stuff, but it's much more difficult. I think Perfect Dark is more balanced towards that gameplay style. I also think the objectives are just more interesting, and maybe that's because of the sci-fi setting. They can do more with it. Like they're not constrained in the same ways, but and I mean the game, it just looks better, right? Because in order to play Perfect Dark, you needed the expansion pack. So they had like a little bit more RAM to work with. But I think like the lighting looks better than GoldenEye. I found it to be more interesting in every respect. I know, like, again, I was not a big multiplayer kid, and so I didn't spend a lot of time playing GoldenEye or Perfect Dark multiplayer. So a lot of the experience that I bring to bear here is about the single player, and I would wager that most people, as iconic as some of the set piece moments in GoldenEye single player are, I bet a lot of people wouldn't challenge me on the fact that Perfect Dark single player is better.
Sure.
So I really like Perfect Dark. I'm now realizing that there's a third game on this list that is similar to this and Medal of Honor Underground. And so hard choices are going to have to be made on the short list. But I do want to keep Perfect Dark around for now so that maybe I can have that conversation later.
Perfect Dark's another one that I just have never played, but I know how much people really like it. So makes sense to me.
Okay.
Next on the list, Pokemon Gold and Silver.
Cut them. Not worth it.
Yeah. So this was Game Boy Color, developed by Game Freak and published by Nintendo. I think this had different game rankings based upon version.
Yes.
Which is weird. Gold had an 89.56 and Silver had a 91.35. Maybe just because some people liked the exclusive Pokemon different from version to version.
Yeah, I guess people liked Lugia, not Ho-Oh. I don't know.
Must have been, yeah. Ho-Oh, I feel like Ho-Oh is cool.
Ho-Oh is cooler.
Gold and Silver is a game that is fairly high on my top 100 games of all time list. I do not have the same nostalgia for it that I do the original games, but I will say that they're probably better just because it's kind of two games in one. You get Johto and Kanto. There are way more Pokemon to catch. You know, it's got the Game Boy Color action going on, so all the sprites look much better. The sound is a little bit better.
Of the unknown Pokemon.
Yeah, the unknown were never my favorite. I always found them to be kind of lame.
I just thought it was cool ancient Pokemon history.
Totally a cool. Yeah, the Pokemon lore felt more involved in the story than it did in the original game for sure, which kind of had none of that.
Right.
It was just the simple gotta catch them all. Yeah, I really love Pokemon Gold and Silver.
Yes.
I prefer the Gold version because I liked Ho-Oh more. My personal taste.
So,
because Ho-Oh's the first Pokemon that you see in the animated series.
Yeah, it flies past Ash. And that was did that come out before Gold and Silver came out?
Yes.
Yeah, so it was a peek into the future. That's cool.
Yeah.
That's cool, man. I do wonder if Silver has a higher game rankings because of Lugia and all the FaceTime that Lugia gets in the Pokemon movie 2000.
could be. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, how much else do we need to say about Pokemon Gold and Silver? I don't
think we need to say anything about Pokemon Gold and Silver that hasn't been said 5 million times before. Pokemon fucking rules, dude.
Yeah. I mean, Red and Blue won our game of the year for the year that it came out. And Gold and Silver, I think, is, to use the adage I've been using the whole time, a less impactful sequel than the original, but a probably objectively better game.
Right.
Almost certainly objectively a better game.
Yeah. Yeah.
Next, more Pokemon action, baby. Pokemon Stadium for the N64. This was developed and published by Nintendo. Game rankings of 78.6, which is another, I think, fair game ranking score, despite it being on the lower end of games we're talking about here. I have very much a soft spot for Pokemon Stadium. I had a ton of fun with this game. I think it looks awesome for the time period, coming from the handheld games, which is so simple with the sprite design, to full 3D modeled. Pokemon looked so cool.
That was huge.
It was a huge bummer that they, with the more powerful technology, they didn't leverage more of the sound effects and the creature sounds from the animated show. They, I think, pretty much just leveraged the same bit whatever sound effects from the handheld games, which was disappointing. It's also a much more straightforward game. So at first glance, the combat kind of feels a little bit more complex just because you have more options, but it's really not. It's still the same rock, paper, scissors as the handheld game, and all you're doing is battling. There are a bunch of mini games and stuff which are fun too, but it's missing any story, any like true exploration and characters. You're really just battling against other trainers,
Right.
which is very much fun, but it's not the same like depth of experience as the handheld games.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I played a lot of those mini games. There were the one that like sticks in my brain is like you're in a classroom and it's being run by either a Jigglypuff or like a Chansey, maybe it's a Clefairy.
Clefairy
Says, yes. Or
the
like
Simon
repeating
Says
after.
knockoff.
Yeah, I played a lot of that particular mini game.
Yep.
That was a good time. But yeah, like Pokemon Stadium, it's a nice rounding out of the franchise and kind of like filling in the fringes of the universe a little bit and making things feel a little more alive. And so like it's cool from that respect, but also I don't have like a super big affinity for it.
Yeah, I would agree. It is a game that I have on my Steam Deck through legal means.
Oh, I have a
and
legal
I do intend
cartridge on my shelf.
I'm sure you do. I don't have an N64. Okay, I do what I can.
I have the Pikachu N64. It's perfect for playing Pokemon Stadium on.
All right. Spyro Year of the Dragon for the PlayStation 1,
yeah.
developed by Insomniac, published by Sony Computer Entertainment, game rankings of 90.59.
Hey, that's good.
I believe on the last Games That Don't Suck podcast where we talked about Spyro 2, I had made a comment to say, like, this is the last time you'll hear Spyro on a Games That Don't Suck podcast because I liked it. I liked the third game significantly less. That's true. However, it's still really fun, and it deserves to be on the long list. It's not going to move forward, in my personal opinion, but it is a very fun game. I think the pros, or the negatives outweigh the pros in comparison to the previous game, because the third one's got more going on. It's got more types of worlds, more interconnectivity, which is very cool, but it also has a lot of side mission worlds where you play as different characters, and those are not at all fun, in my opinion. Like, if you think the flying levels from the original one suck, these levels in the third one are much worse. I think one of them you're a kangaroo, where it's like a kind of like a Crash Bandicoot style, and then there's another one I think where you play as like a big Yeti monster where you just bash shit, and it's just not engaging. But yeah, it's a very fun game. I think the story is really fun. It's got more like, again, more interconnectivity between the really themed worlds that you visit. And so that part of it, I think, is very cool. And it kind of sort of like expands the lore of Spyro in the different, universes that he can visit. But overall, the gameplay doesn't feel like a huge step up. And some of the structure, like you're progressing through the game by collecting orbs. And like, it's just, some of it feels kind of tedious the way that you're going about doing that.
Okay. I mean, I will remind folks, Spyro Reignited Trilogy was just added to Xbox Game Pass. So if you have not,
totally worth
for
playing.
some reason, have never played Spyro, or have like not played one of the Spyro games, that's all of your excuses are gone. So you should go check that out.
It was a fantastic remaster.
Yeah.
I had a ton of fun like replaying those old games, and it like confirmed my memory of how I felt about that trilogy.
Right.
In that the first one I just like the best. It's the simplicity. It makes more sense to me. And then, much like we're talking about with a lot of these games, the second one is probably objectively a better game. It's more refined, it's got more variety, but I liked the simplicity of the first one. And then the third one just went too far. It's an awesome game, it's super fun, but it just took things a little too far for my taste.
Yeah.
Next, and then I get to take a break for a few games. Next is SSX for the PlayStation 2. I love seeing PlayStation 2 games on this list. This was developed by EA Canada and published by EA Sports.
It's in the game.
Game rankings of 92.93. This is a game that I loved. I like Tricky, which was the sequel, and SSX3 more than I like the first game. But again, similar to Hitman, like as a proof of concept, it's so fucking fun. It's a great combination of the more like sim-based, we talked about like 1080 snowboarding a couple of episodes ago, or I guess like a couple of release year episodes ago. as being a great sort of mixture between an arcadey and a sim style downhill snowboarding racing game. SSX is like that with kookiness and with badass tricks, and they get away with that because like the tricks give you speed boosts, so you kind of have to do cool tricks and you have to like seek out the grind rails and the jumps in order to win the time-based stuff. And it just has a really good balance between those two things. Like you never feel like you're giving up on the race to do cool tricks, and you never feel like going out of your way to do a cool trick hurts you trying to win the race.
Yeah,
it's like a great balance of those.
That's really important.
Yeah. I just think that the later games just, they've got more characters, more variety, more like weirdness in the tracks. But the first one, again, as a big Tony Hawk fan, we already talked about Jet Set Radio. Like, I loved that kind of racing plus time trials plus tricks style games. SSX had a great vibe to it. Again, an awesome soundtrack and just like cool characters. You know, made up ridiculous characters, very cartoony sort of aesthetic to it, with the big baggy snow pants and everybody's wearing goggles.
Oh yeah, dude.
Just good shit. I think in comparison to Jet Set Radio, I think Jet Set Radio has more, the style is a little more differentiated, I think in a lot of ways because of like the cell shading and just the colors that they use. And also like, I think the soundtrack is better in Jet Set Radio. So it's really just like, comparing those games head to head, I just think Jet Set Radio is a better version of this style of game in pretty much every way. But SSX rules, and you will hear Tricky and SSX3 on these podcasts in the future for sure.
Yeah,
but I think we can cut it.
All right, if you say so.
Yeah.
All right, next up
a lot of mine are so borderline.
Yeah.
Like Majora's Mask,
tough.
SSX. Really, those are like the two that I'm like, I could totally fight for these, but I just know they're not going to make it. There's just too many other ones.
Yeah, it is really, really tough when it's borderline like that.
Yeah. We've done enough of these that like you kind of know
tell,
if something has a chance or not.
Yeah.
Whenever we get to the short list, there's usually like 2 or 3 where it's like, we know this game's not going to make it. We should have cut it. And I feel like I'm moving ahead by just cutting those now rather than waiting.
Right. Yeah. I think that's fair. All right. Next up is Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 2. On the original PlayStation, this was developed by Neversoft, published by Activision, with a game rankings of 94.75, by a hair the highest on this list.
Which is kind of crazy.
Yeah. I mean,
that Tony Hawk is the highest. And also kind of crazy that Perfect Dark is the second highest. There are a lot of good games on here.
There are a lot of really, really good games on here.
Those are not the two that I would have assumed would be the highest rated, but...
Yeah, that's true.
It just shows you that the aggregate score is, it's a good sort of table setter for these conversations, but also not super useful.
Right. Yeah, for sure.
In the grand scheme.
But Tony Hawk Pro Skater 2, probably not a hot take. It is the best Tony Hawk. I know I'm saying that a lot. Like the second one is the best of a lot of these that I'm bringing up today. It's
funny because that's the opposite of what I'm saying about a lot of the sequels that I'm bringing to the table.
Right.
Is like they're great, but they're not as good as the original.
Yeah, and like in this case, I just like Tony Hawk Pro Skater 2 is the one, man. It doesn't have the level editor that I think started in 3 and was like perfected the one after that. But it's what I talked about earlier in the podcast, right? Where it's the familiar thing with a couple extra little systems in it that spice things up, and it's just the right amount. So in this case, I also think the levels are better than the first Tony Hawk. Like School 2 is way better than School 1. Graffiti Pits fucking rules. I don't remember enough about the individual soundtracks of Tony Hawk's to know if one soundtrack is better than another. I think all their soundtracks are just really good, so I think that's just fair to say, let's call that one a wash. But the big new feature in Tony Hawk Pro Skater 2 was upgrading your skater. So in the first one, it was like you're trying to get the VHS tapes, get the skate letters, whatever, like complete. You're trying to get like high score stuff. In Tony Hawk Pro Skater 2, when you're completing objectives and beating stages, you're getting cash, which you can trade in for like upgrading your skater, new decks, skaters, etc., whatever. And like that little bit of interactivity, the little bit of progression thrown in there was like all the excuse I needed to spend countless hours grinding the game out. Tony Hawk Pro Skater 2 fucking is incredible. It's an incredible video game.
Yeah, I personally like 3 and 4 more because they are on PS2 and that was just like they just felt better to me. But I don't blame you at all for liking the second one the most because of how like big of a level up it is over the first game.
Yeah,
I think Tony Hawk Pro Skater 2 totally sticks around, is an absolutely amazing game. I just liked the third one better because I thought it looked better and played better because of the updated controller and graphics and all that good stuff.
Yeah, like I like the first Tony Hawk. I really like 3 and 4. I love 2. Just like the levels in 2 are my favorite. I think they're just terrific.
Yeah.
All right. Next up is The World Is Not Enough for the original PlayStation, developed by Black Ops Entertainment, published by EA, with a game rankings of only 68.25, which is shocking. And this is the PlayStation version. There's also an N64 version that has slightly higher game rankings, which is very surprising because like the PlayStation version is just better than the N64 version. People are fucking out of their mind.
That's usually the case in this era.
Yes, yeah. I just think like this is, I said that Perfect Dark, it's better than GoldenEye in a lot of ways. World Is Not Enough is what the GoldenEye campaign should have been. I think the PS1 version, it looks incredible. It runs really well. It performs really well. The lighting is great. The gadgets are just way better. They're way more Bond-like than the stuff that was in GoldenEye. The story is told a lot more cinematically. It's just an all-around better video game. The World Is Not Enough is really, really good. I think on my James Bond tier list, it was the highest of the Bs.
I think it was an A tier.
A. The only S tiers were Agent Under Fire and Nightfire in that PS2 order.
Ones.
And then this was the highest of the A tiers. I think you're right. World Is Not Enough. The World Is Not Enough. It does not contain enough words for me to say positive things about this video game. It's so good. I want to put it on the list because I want to have a head-to-head
between Perfect Dark,
Medal of Honor, and World Is Not
Medal
Enough.
of Honor. Yeah, I think that's fair. Yeah. I know. Yeah, you. And if folks want to hear more about all of the James Bond games, but in particular World Is Not Enough, you can check out our flagship pod with Kyle's tier list of all the James Bond games. I know you loved this one. I think it was third on that list.
Yeah.
So makes sense for it to stick around. I will run through our final game on the long list, and then we can kind of take stock of where we are. So finally is Vagrant Story for PlayStation 1. This was developed by Square Enix, or I guess it wasn't Square Enix, but Square Division 4, and published by Square Electronic Arts.
Game Mill Entertainment.
Yeah. Game rankings of 91.97. This is a rare RPG in this era that felt like I was playing a completely different kind of game.
Yeah.
The story of the game, I think, fits very much into a normal mold. It's the plucky young dude out to save the world. It had a lot of, like, visually, there were certainly, like, Final Fantasy influences, or I don't want to say direct influences, but it's similar to a lot of Final Fantasies in that it had sort of a dark, brooding atmosphere around it. It had a lot of what I would describe as being like gothic medieval fantasy vibe, so like a Final Fantasy 12 style.
Yeah, I was about to say this
like,
looks a lot like a proto design for Final Fantasy 12 in terms of the art.
Yeah, like instead of zippers everywhere, everyone just has like random pieces of armor.
Yeah,
like just on my elbow. Like it's just like weird kind of shit like that.
Yeah.
But it didn't have a lot of the angst that many of the Final Fantasy games have, especially like 7 and 8 around this time period.
Right.
But yeah, it's more of a darker sort of world and story than some of the Final Fantasy things. From a gameplay perspective, was the biggest difference. So it plays more real time. It's sort of like you can pause the action. So it's kind of like, it's a little bit more real time than like an active time battle, but it's not like purely real time like a modern Final Fantasy game would be. And the combat itself, like you select a target, and when you're attacking it, it sort of has like rhythm based button presses to do max damage, which kind of made the combat feel even more engaging than a lot of the traditional turn based stuff did.
Yeah.
And I thought that was like super cool.
There's a lot of really cool visual elements to the combat. When you freeze time, like the wire grid thing that pops out, you select like the limb that you want to attack. Cool stuff.
It's got a very cool like visual aesthetic during combat. I personally, like, at the end of the day, preferred the more traditional stuff, probably because it was the more traditional stuff. It was what I was used to. But as a game that was out there, like, trying new things and doing really different stuff, that was really exciting. I did really like the story and the characters. The main character, Ashley, is, you know, a prototypical protagonist, but I mean that in a lot of ways as a compliment. He's very endearing and plucky and kind of goofy and kind of like feeling sorry for himself, like many of these characters in this time were wont to do. The way that you engage with the world is also super different. There's like, you're not buying stuff at shops. I don't even think there are no shops in the game. There's no like you're walking up to characters and talking to them. It's a lot more, not like menu driven, but like you're building and crafting your weapons and your items, and there's lots of menus and systems around doing that thing.
Okay.
So rather than like collecting gil and buying a new sword, you're crafting a sword from things that you're collecting throughout the world, and that's really how you're leveling up and progressing in the game. It also has this risk system in combat, which was really cool, where it was sort of like a risk and reward system, thus the name. Because like the more you attack an enemy, the more risk points you accumulate, and the higher your risk, the better chance you have at like critical hits, for example. And I think like magic does more damage or whatever it might be, but also you take more damage and you're more at risk of getting KO'd or poisoned or whatever it might be. So it's sort of a risk reward in, do you want to really focus on one enemy, build up a lot of risk, but get a lot of crits? Or do you want to spread the damage around and be able to sort of manage your HP pool and your move pool a little bit better? And you can kind of make your choices however much risk you want to take in the combat.
Yeah, that's neat.
But yeah, it's a very cool game. It's weird because it's not one that like immediately jumps to mind as one of my favorite 90s, early 2000s RPGs, but it is, at least for me, a rare example of an RPG, a JRPG that felt very unique and singular. So I think it's like that's certainly worth something, but like I like Chrono Cross more than I like Vagrant Story, which means I like a lot of other JRPGs more than I like Vagrant Story. So I'm kind of mixed on where it should go. I know I guess I should say, I don't believe you've played this, right?
I have not. So it's one of my recent acquisitions. I have a very nice copy of it. I am intent on playing it. I have a strategy guide for it, I think. I don't know. I'll have to look and see. I forget which JRPGs I've gotten strategy guides for and which ones I haven't yet. But I am really, really looking forward to playing that one just because I know it is very different than other games of its time. And that it'll be like
here's a
really fun kind of what's the word? Case study on innovation at that time period.
Yeah. Interesting tidbit. I'm just scrolling on the Wikipedia page. This was made in large part by the team that ended up making Final Fantasy Tactics.
Oh, hell yeah, dude.
Yeah. So that's cool.
That's really cool. Okay.
Very different combat systems.
Sure.
Which is interesting.
Yeah.
But yeah, I guess this was the division of Square that made those, not the core Division 1 that was working on Final Fantasy, or whichever division was working on that one.
Right, yeah.
But yeah, Vagrant Story, I think it probably doesn't continue on just because you haven't played it. but it's very cool. If this is one of the rare ones that like people might not have even heard of. So if you can find a way to check it out, watch some gameplay, etc., it's really cool.
Yeah, it's just like
got a really cool visual aesthetic.
There are so many JRPGs that it's like it's hard to know when you hear a name if it's like one of
which
the
one
important
it is
ones, or not. And I think largely people agree that Vagrant Story is one of those important ones that actually not a lot of people have gotten to.
I would totally agree with that for sure. It's an awesome game.
All right, well that's the long list, dude. We have 8 games on the short list.
Wow, good for us.
Yeah, we did a nice job there. We got rid of more than half.
Let's see if we can feel good about a 5
we'll
from this 8, though. We might have to bring some stuff back.
All right, the short list is Chrono Cross, Diablo II, Jet Set Radio, Medal of Honor Underground, Perfect Dark, Pokemon Gold and Silver, Tony Hawk Pro Skater 2, and The World Is Not Enough.
I already hate how many of my games are not on this short list because I cut them.
I was about to say you gave up on all of them.
I think it was like 11 to 7 in terms of which of us brought games to this, me being the 11. And I've only got like 3 games on here that were like my games.
You just weren't that
That's not true.
about.
I have 2 games.
You weren't that passionate
I have 2 games
them,
on
dude.
here. But that's the thing. Like, I am passionate about them, but I'm not as passionate about them as like I want to be. Banjo-Tooie, Majora's Mask, and SSX are like the 3 that I really love, but probably not enough.
All right, well,
and that's probably still
looking
true.
at the short list right now, are there any of those you would like to bring up into the conversation?
Well, let's go ahead and start whittling down and then see how we feel.
Okay.
I don't know about you. I think there are 2 games that for sure should make it because we both love them and represent us well. Again, as always, doesn't mean that these 2 games are necessarily the top 2 games, but I think 2 games that should be on this list.
Yeah.
Which 2 games do you think that those are?
Pokemon Gold and Silver and Tony Hawk Pro Skater 2.
Yes.
Okay.
Those 2 games should be on our top 5.
All right. I will highlight them in green.
Of the myriad of games that I brought to the table, the 2 remaining, at least right now, are Chrono Cross and Jet Set Radio. Looking at this list, I think both of them should make it, but I would put Jet Set Radio at the top of my personal list of like between those 2 games. I think
really
Jet Set Radio should be in the top 5.
The idea of Jet Set Radio being on there, just because I know how cool it is, even though I haven't played it.
I think
how singular it is.
Coming into this, like I have no idea what's going to win, and I didn't have any idea what was going to win. 1, because there were so many games, and 2, because there wasn't one that I was like, this is the one for me. But if I had to pick one amongst this list, it's probably Jet Set Radio as being like my number 1 would push for game.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I do like that. I like the idea of Jet Set Radio a lot. I'm sure if I were to play it, I would really enjoy it.
Let's do the Medal of Honor Perfect Dark World Is Not Enough convo.
That sucks, man.
I think at least one of those games should make the top 5.
I agree. I mean, obviously, if this was my top 5, I think all 3 of them would be on it. Well, okay. Actually, now that I say that, I like Perfect Dark a lot. I do not like Perfect Dark as much as Medal of Honor or World Is Not Enough.
Really?
I think I can already make that call.
That's surprising.
I think I can already make that call. So if I'm thinking Medal of Honor versus World Is Not Enough, recency bias, I have played World Is Not Enough much more recently than I have played Medal of Honor Underground. Also, I think The World Is Not Enough for me has the extra baggage of, man, I really didn't like GoldenEye, and that bums me out. And this thing like really redeemed that style of Bond game for me.
All right.
It's like
so there's like a really little bit of like vindictive nature in it.
No. I just mean like
a little bit of spite.
No, not at all. I'm sad that I don't like GoldenEye the same way that other people like GoldenEye.
Right.
And so like The World Is Not Enough is my GoldenEye. And I think it was just fucking terrific. Yeah, I think World Is Not Enough has more going for it than Medal of Honor Underground. It in terms of its systems, it's less straightforward, it's more complex, and in that way it is more rewarding to play. I think Medal of Honor Underground is cinematic in its own way, but not as sophisticated as World Is Not Enough. Not as sophisticated of a video game.
The only thing, I think that is definitely true, knowing the Medal of Honor series, like they were doing Call of Duty before Call of Duty.
Right.
Like it's the straightforward, over the top sort of action-y gameplay, versus World Is Not Enough is more of like a spy thriller in its story and its gameplay. So that makes sense. The only thing that I would say is, like, having not played World Is Not Enough, I have played Medal of Honor Underground. I don't have the strong passion of positivity for it that you did coming into this, so that's worth something. Like, I like the first game and Frontline the most of those early games, but I did play and enjoy Underground. So, like, I would lean towards Underground just because I've played it and liked it, but I don't have the passion for it that I like. If we were talking about Frontline versus World Is Not Enough, I would definitely be like, no, Frontline's got to be the one. But I don't feel that way about Underground because I don't feel as passionately about it.
I would also probably choose Frontline over World Is Not Enough, because Frontline's incredible.
Frontline is amazing.
Yeah, I think I'm definitely World Is Not Enough for sure. Of those three, Medal of Honor, Perfect Dark, World Is Not Enough, it's that one.
All right. Okay.
Now, that doesn't mean we have to lock it in as one of the top 5, because we also have Diablo 2 and Chrono Cross to talk about, and potentially you to bring up other ones that maybe we didn't bring up before.
Well, I mean, I think where we are, I don't think those other 3 games realistically have a shot. Because I think between Chrono Cross, Diablo 2, and World Is Not Enough, I think 2 of those games are deserving to be in the top 5, whichever 2 it is. I would not push for... Like, I wouldn't push for any of my 3 games, those being Banjo-Tooie, Majora's Mask, SSX. I would not push for any of those over Chrono Cross. And that's kind of like the only argument that I can make.
Right.
So between, like, for you with World Is Not Enough, like, would you keep that over Diablo 2?
I would, yeah.
Yeah, you seemed a little bit on the fence about Diablo 2 when we kept it.
Yeah, I like everything I said about it was very positive, and then it came time to like keeping it around, and I was like, do I guess, yeah. I don't have anything bad to say about Diablo 2. It's a great game. I don't hold it in as high of esteem. And again, like, recency bias is a real thing.
Sure.
World Is Not Enough was so fucking good, dude.
That's funny, because like when I think about Chrono Cross, I kind of had the opposite, where a lot of me talking about that game was things that were a little disappointing compared to Chrono Trigger. But then when it came down to like, should we keep this game? I was like, definitely we should keep it. even though I found it disappointing, we should definitely keep it.
Yeah.
Because it being disappointing doesn't mean it isn't one of the best games that came out. Because I do very much believe that Chrono Cross should be in the top 5. So is that the answer?
I think
if
that's
you're not
the
as
answer.
passionate about Diablo 2, like, and you want to keep World Is Not Enough, I feel like there's our 5.
Yeah, I really do want to keep World Is Not Enough.
I definitely wouldn't keep any of those other 3 games, Banjo-Tooie, Majora's Mask, SSX. I would not keep those over Chrono Cross, and I wouldn't argue for them over World Is Not Enough. 1, given how much you love it just in a vacuum, and 2, given how it won the fight between Perfect Dark and Medal of Honor. I feel like the winner of that as a representative of like cool first-person shooters, like that, given that there are so many of them on this list, that deserves to be represented. Like, there are enough good ones that I like.
It was a really good year
there.
for those.
Yeah, it totally was.
Yeah,
they're very different though.
They are.
Like, it's kind of like the Perfect Dark is the most complex, and then World Is Not Enough is sort of like not lesser in a pejorative way, but like a more straightforward version of Perfect Dark, and then Medal of Honor is a way more straightforward version of World Is Not Enough.
Right. Yeah. In a way, yeah. That's funny.
So I think those are our 5, yeah?
Okay. All right. Yeah. I think I'm good with that. That's a really nice top 5. So
what's that list?
That list
for the
in
listeners?
no particular order yet is, well, I guess it's still alphabetical.
Alphabetical.
Chrono Cross, Jet Set Radio, Pokemon Gold and Silver, Tony Hawk Pro Skater 2, and The World Is Not Enough. Uh-huh.
How would you feel about Chrono Cross and World Is Not Enough being at the bottom of the list?
I would have World Is Not Enough above Jet Set Radio for sure.
No way.
I would also put it above Chrono Cross, but
I'm not saying the ordering right now. I just mean like as our bottom 2 games being Chrono Cross and World Is Not Enough.
I mean, for me, World Is Not Enough is it's 2 or 3. Probably 3.
For your personal
my
ranking.
Personal ranking, yes.
Yep.
So given that it's a team exercise, yes. One of the bottom 2 slots could be World Is Not Enough.
Well, okay. I said this earlier, and I didn't mean it when I said it, but for the sake of argument, I meant it. I do think that Tony Hawk and Pokemon should be the top 2 games.
I agree.
And I would argue, I think Tony Hawk should win.
I don't.
I think you don't. You think Gold and Silver should win?
Oh yeah.
Okay, good. I believe that Gold and Silver should win.
Why did you say Tony Hawk should win?
No.
What?
So I'm in the middle of telling you, Kyle. If you would stop interrupting me. Given how much you loved Tony Hawk, I was totally fine for Tony Hawk to win because I thought that's what you would want.
No, dude, it's Pokemon.
And like,
bro.
I'm not. Yeah, I'm totally down with that.
Okay.
Because yes, Pokemon, taking like I would take Pokemon over Jet Set Radio for my personal list for sure.
Yeah.
Like Pokemon is definitely the number 1 for me. But yeah, I think then Tony Hawk 2 is definitely number 2.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest reason that I would
4, and
advocate
5 is going to be is the sticking point.
The reason that I would advocate for Jet Set Radio at 3 is just because of the uniqueness of the aesthetic and the style and like the way that all of those components come together in such a singular way that like frankly no game has ever been able to match, which is why you had the recent, I think it was like last year, there was like an indie project that was very much a spiritual successor. Like the fact that it's been over 20 years since we've gotten that kind of game again. And even that recent one, like it didn't hit the same way that Jet Set Radio did. It just had it has some of the best vibes of any video game ever made. And that's not me being hyperbolic whatsoever. I truly believe that.
I think that's fair.
I think from a
I do
gameplay
like to reward
perspective,
games that do new stuff.
Yeah, and I think from a gameplay perspective, it's a game that's like more than the sum of its parts because its individual parts in a lot of ways are like borrowed from others of its contemporaries. Like, I mentioned Crazy Taxi, again, Tony Hawk, it's got a lot of those elements to it. And it just like does those things in combination in a very cool way. But that in and of itself is not what makes it special. It's the vibe and the style that elevates Jet Set Radio to being this like transcendent badass video game, which is a positive and a negative, right? Because like its core gameplay mechanics aren't the most innovative or interesting, but its feel is what is unique about it.
Counterpoint.
Yep.
Do we really want 2 skating games in the top 3?
I don't see why not. I mean, you're on rollerblades in Jet Set Radio.
Hey, look.
So it's not really the same.
Aggressive inlining is skating, bro.
So you're saying we couldn't also put SSX on here in theory? No, I think
not as
right.
One of the top 3. 2 skating games in the top 3.
I
know they're completely different. I know.
No, I know. I would have a very hard time putting World Is Not Enough above both Jet Set and Chrono Cross. Not saying it can't be above one of them. I would put Jet Set above Chrono Cross, and through that logic, I would put Jet Set. I think Jet Set should be above World Is Not Enough, which means it's at number 3. Its correlation in ranking to Tony Hawk is meaningless. IMO.
I know, I'm just trying to be a shit.
What are the best games, man? What are the best games? I think those are the 3 best games. I do.
Okay.
And if you want to put, if you think World Is Not Enough should be at 4, that's fine. I'm not a stickler. Again, the way that I think about Chrono Cross is it's an amazing JRPG that was disappointing in relation to its predecessor, which is like maybe like the 3rd best JRPG ever made. Like, the comparison isn't really fair, but that being said, it still does exist. So if you would put World Is Not Enough above Chrono Cross, I think that's totally fine. I think Chrono Cross being on the top 5 is where it belongs. So if it's at number 5, whatevs. Like, I'm more passionate about Jet Set being higher on the list than I am Chrono Cross being higher.
Yeah, it's hard for me because I haven't played either of those.
Right. I mean, I haven't played World Is Not Enough.
I know, yeah.
And the fact that you keep saying that it's better than GoldenEye honestly makes me kind of hate this game, if I'm being real. Like, I have motivation to dislike World Is Not Enough because of your dumb opinions.
Oh, come on,
which has nothing to do with World Is Not Enough. World Is Not Enough could be totally awesome. It could be the 4th best James Bond game.
It's the 3rd best, dude.
Not if it's above GoldenEye.
GoldenEye's at the bottom. GoldenEye ass tier, bro.
You're a dummy. You're a dumb with dumb.
Have you played
opinions.
that campaign recently? It's not good.
No, I hear you.
Okay.
What a crazy list. What a stupid list. I hate this top 5. I think it's good. I think this is a good top 5, but I hate it. It's stupid.
It is really, like...
Why is it so stupid?
It's really dumb, isn't it? Before I say it out loud to the audience, I want to make sure, because it's stupid.
Like, putting Pokemon at the top, it's a homer pick. Whatever. We love Pokemon games. It's no other Pokemon game will win any of the lists.
Ruby and Sapphire for me, dude.
No. Ruby and Sapphire is not going to win in its year. I like Ruby and Sapphire too. It ain't going to win the year.
Yeah, I guess
I
don't know what else came out that year, but
I don't know what else came out that year, but it's not going to win. There's just no way. It's not even close to the same tier as Red, Blue, and Gold and Silver. But point being, like, Chrono Cross, one of the greatest RPGs ever made, is at number 5. Okay, yeah, fine. So then what's number 4? A James Bond first-person shooter game.
The 3rd best one.
All right, okay. All right, what's better than that? Jet Set Radio. Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Like, people love that game. It's got a cool vibe. What's above that? Tony Hawk Pro Skater 2. Okay, yeah, sure. Kind of weird that you got 2 similar games that are in the top 3. Yeah, they're both kind of
that is weird, isn't it?
High score games. It's a little weird, but they are both really, really good games. Okay, so then what's number 1 then? Pokemon Gold and Silver. And then I feel like that's when people are like, fuck you. Like, when I think about, like, what is a traditional video game, right? It's got deep mechanics, story, characters, art direction, world building. I'm not saying that is what a video game should be, but when you think of a traditional video game, I feel like those are the things that come to mind.
Pokemon's got it all, dude.
Only one of these games is that, which is Chrono Cross. Like, World Is Not Enough, it's a first-person shooter. That's a really common genre. I'm not taking that away from it. But it's just weird when we talk about all of the games we've talked about, right? Banjo-Tooie, Diablo II, Final Fantasy IX, Majora's Mask, Perfect Dark, Spyro, Vagrant Story. All of those games feel more like a traditional video game than 4 of the games in our top 5 do. That's what makes it feel dumb.
Hey,
I do think it's right.
Chaos move. Get rid of Chrono Cross. Put on Army Men Sarge's Heroes 2 in number 5.
No, Kyle. No.
Come on.
Army Men is definitively in 18th place. Which is great. That's very high. You know how many games came out in the year 2000? It is definitively in 18th place.
Oh, shoot.
I would probably put it behind a handful of the games that I haven't played.
Well, that's rude.
I do love it. I love the Army Men games. But no, Kyle, it does not belong in the top 5.
All right, fine. Our top 5 are in the number 5 slot, Chrono Cross.
Wait, I'm sorry. No, you're saying Chrono Cross is number 1 is what you were saying,
nope,
right?
Number 5.
Voice of the audience.
Chrono Cross. Number 4. The World Is Not Enough. And frankly, neither is number 4. Should be higher. Number 3, Jet Set Radio. Number 2, yes. Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 2, good symmetry. And yes. Number 1, Pokemon Gold and Silver.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't really care that much about Chrono Cross. Those other 4 games are real cool. And I believe that Chrono Cross is really good, so that's fine.
It is. It is really good. I believe you that World Is Not Enough is more than just a fun first-person shooter. See, that doesn't feel good, does it? Doesn't it feel like I'm being condescending?
Yeah, it was rude.
Yeah, that's how it felt when you said that about Chrono Cross. You jerk.
Yeah, I don't see the symmetry.
I believe you. I'll take your word for it that this is a good video game.
I'm just not seeing the
I wasn't
symmetry
listening when you talked about it.
Yeah. Hey, listeners, thanks for being that, for listening. If you have an issue with our list, get over it.
I'm not surprised.
Yeah, and or email us at info@SheaHatesEverything.com. What are your top 5 games of 2000?
Yeah.
Give us some feedback. What do you like about the podcast? What don't you like about the podcast? We'll read your emails live on our flagship podcast. Which...
Well, we'll be reading them live. You won't be listening to it live.
Yeah. We read them... Why did I say live?
I don't know, because
live.
Technically everything we're doing right now is live. We're not reading them live.
We will be alive when we read
different.
them on the flagship podcast,
right.
Which is airing December 2nd, Monday, December 2nd. That's the next episode of the flagship podcast. We're going to have to record that one like a week early. So we're doing a fun kind of tier list for that one. Stay tuned. You'll see in the title of that episode what the tier list is. So kind of a little bit more ranking fun. If you enjoy this format, you'll probably enjoy that flagship pod. We talk about the stuff that we've been playing recently, not just games that we played a long time ago. We might talk about a couple other things, but the main focus on that one's going to be whatever that tier list is going to be. Spoilers, we haven't decided yet, which is why I can't tell you.
At time of recording. Yeah, that's true. You could have made it seem like we knew what we were doing and you were just trying to tease it out. You're correct.
We're idiots.
We're recording it in a week and we have not decided.
Our top 5 for the year 2000. We're idiots.
I want to do production note quickly. Yeah. For the folks that are listening to this and just set the stage for the next couple of months of podcasts. So as Kyle said, first Monday of December on the 2nd will be our flagship pod. The third Monday, December 16th, we'll be jumping to modern time.
Whoa! Like Chrono Trigger.
We'll be doing Games That Suck 2024. Normal, or actually I guess it's not really a normal flagship on the first... on the January 6th, because that will be a lot of we'll do like our superlatives episode. So like our favorite looking games, our favorite stories, our favorite characters. We'll be doing those on the flagship podcast on the 6th. On January 20th, that Monday, will be Games That Don't Suck 2024. So our top 5 games, just like we did here, but for 2024. And then, just as a little tease, as we look forward to February, we have a little surprise. We won't be going directly to 2001. We're going to do something a little bit different for the February episode of this podcast. So keep your ears peeled and your eyes listening for a couple months from now.
Nailed it.
Yep.
Thanks for listening with your eyes. You can find the Shea Hates Everything podcast wherever you engage with your podcast. Be sure to subscribe, leave a rating or a review, but most importantly, tell your friends. Let them know how these two idiot brothers have really bad takes on video games.
They said a James Bond game is better than Majora's Mask.
And Chrono Cross. And Army Men Sarge's Heroes 2.
Fair. Technically, we said Army Men Sarge's Heroes 2 is better than Baldur's Gate 2. In a sense, we said that.
Yeah, we just haven't played it.
Exactly. And we took the time to play Army Men. We did not take the time to play Baldur's Gate 2.
You're
so
right.
in a sense, we're saying Army Men was worth more of our time than Baldur's Gate 2.
You're right. Legend
your
of
headline.
Mana, shit tier. Not worth your
Local
time.
Morons say James Bond game is better than Baldur's Gate 2.
All right, these local morons are signing off. Thanks, everybody. We'll talk to you soon in podcast form. Bye.